There are sounds Red Hollow should never hear again. Sounds that belong to the past, buried along with the men who perished trying to extract riches from the desert. But that night, the heavy silence of the town was broken by something that chilled me to the core, the sound of pickaxes. I know that sound well. For years, the mines kept this town alive and also killed it, one shovelful of dirt at a time. I saw men disappear into the darkness, crushed by rocks, suffocated by dust, swallowed by the earth that refused to give them what they wanted. When the last entrance collapsed, they said Red Hollow would never again hear the echo of pickaxes against stone. But the curse of this town never keeps its promises. I was walking down Main Street when the sound reached me, at first faint, like a whisper of wind, then louder, rhythmic, insistent, until there was no doubt someone was digging. The problem is, no one digs in Red Hollow after midnight. Not with the abandoned mines, not with the dead left inside. I followed the sound to the edge of town. The sickly moon illuminated the rusty tracks that once carried wagons full of coal. Now, there was only dry grass and rust, but the sound was there, piercing the earth, vibrating in my bones like an invisible drum. Pickaxes, always 3 blows, a pause, then 3 more. My hand went to the handle of my revolver, even though I knew no bullet could silence someone who already belongs underground. The wind carried a strange smell, just dust, but rust, sulfur, and something sweeter, like rotting flowers. I recognized it immediately, the same odor I smell in the cemetery when the dead stir. At that moment, I understood. It wasn't the living who braved the night. It was them, the miners, who died in the bowels of the earth. Men who didn't put down their tools even after being buried under tons of stone. The sound echoing in the silence wasn't human labor. It was the curse of Red Hollow, a reminder that even underground, not everyone rests. And if you think the sound of pickaxes in the dead of night is enough to chill your blood, wait until you see what I found when I followed that echo. Because in Red Hollow, it's not always the living who continue to work underground. I followed the sound like someone following a familiar voice, but one I should never have heard again. Each step I took along the dirt road brought me closer to the old Red Hollow mine entrancey place that should have been dead, buried by the town itself. Bet that night, the desert filled with echoes, and it seemed as if the dead had decided to take up the work that death had taken from them. The mine entrance loomed before me like the mouth of a hungry creature. The wooden pillars supporting the tunnel were rotten, covered in the marks of time, yet they creaked as if they were alive. The smell hit me before I even crossed the darkness. Rust, sulfur, and old sweat, mixed with that sweet odor only rotting flesh can bring. It was the smell of a cemetery, but mixed with the heart of the earth. The pickaxes pounded harder inside, each blow echoing through the tunnel like a hammer pounding inside my skull. 3 blows, a brief silence, and then 3 more. It wasn't a random sound. It was a rhythm, an order, as if the dead still obeyed an invisible overseer. buried alongside them. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw the fresh marks on the stone. They weren't old scratches, not reminders of a time gone by. They were fresh. The stone chips still gleamed in the faint moonlight, filtering through the cracks. The tracks that cut through the mine floor were scarred by wheels that should no longer roll, and yet there were marks of wagons being dragged. I advanced a few more meters. The sound of my footsteps was muffled by the thick dust, but the echoes of the miners continued steadily, like an underground march. I felt the weight of the desert on my head, as if tons of sand and stone were watching me. A cold wind blew from inside the tunnel, although I knew there was no draft there. It was like breathing the breath of something asleep, yet restless. The broken lanterns hanging on the walls began to sway slightly. No flames should have been there, but one of them flickered for a moment, casting twisted shadows across the mine ceiling. It wasn't fire, but a pale, almost green light, like that of a corpse illuminated by the moon. Then I heard the voices, low, muffled, mingling with the sound of pickaxes. They weren't speaking to me directly, but murmured among themselves, like exhausted men sharing laments during a dig. But with each step I took, one word stood out from the chorus: sheriff. The earth seemed to breathe. The ground beneath my feet vibrated in time with the pickaxes, and I felt as if I were walking over a giant body buried there. My hands sweated inside my gloves, and the weight of the revolver in my holster seemed useless. No bullet kills an echo. No trigger silences the persistence of the dead. I stood at an intersection inside the mine, where two tunnels diverged. Both were dark. Both pulsated with the same rhythmic sound. I knew that no matter which path I chose, I would meet the same fate, the miners of Red Hollow, still clinging to their tools, digging not for their lives, but for their damnation. In that moment, I realized I hadn't gone to the mine by choice. I was called. With every strike of the pickaxe, with every voice that whispered my name, I felt that this work wasn't just theirs. It was also my burden. And if the dead still dig, perhaps it's because they seek something that also belongs to me. The tunnel narrowed as I advanced, and the sensation of being swallowed by the earth grew stronger. The sound of pickaxes grew in intensity, not because there were more of them, but because I was getting closer. With each step, the ground trembled slightly, as if the bones of the mountain itself were being struck. The echo echoed off the walls, creating a labyrinth of sound impossible to decipher. My eyes scanned the abandoned tracks that cut through the darkness. They were worn, rusted, but scarred with recent wheel tracks. Cars that should no longer exist had passed by. Further ahead, one of them appeared before me. A small ore car, tipped on its side, still full to the brim. But what it carried wasn't stone or coal. It was bones, human bones, mixed with dust and bits of broken tools. I swallowed hard, trying to control my breathing. The dust was thick, each inhalation carrying a metallic taste of rust and old blood. The flashlight in my trembling hand illuminated the path, and then I saw something move. It wasn't a shadow cast by the light. It was a shape hunched over, carrying another flashlight, but this flashlight had no flame. It was just a pale glow, like an ember that never goes out. The man, if he could still be called a man, was dressed in torn miner's clothes, covered in dust and dried blood. His face, however, was not that of a living man. His eyes were sunken and dark, but they reflected the moonlight like those of a nocturnal animal. His skin had the texture of dried leather, and his fingers, still firmly on the pickaxe, tapped against the mine wall with the same rhythm I had heard from town. 3 blows, pause. 3 blows. I wasn't alone. Further ahead, other silhouettes moved in unison, all silent except for the rhythmic sound of tools. There were at least half a dozen of them, scattered throughout the tunnels, illuminated only by the dim lights they carried. None of them looked up, none seemed to notice my presence. It was as if they still believed they were alive, trapped in an endless task. I approached slowly, my heart beating like a drum, when one of the miners turned his face slightly. I had confirmation. It was a man I had known in life. I remember the burial. I remember the grave filled over his body. And now he was there, with the same face, only more rigid, more worn, more dead. His pickaxe struck the stone, and a faint spark illuminated the tunnel. For a brief moment, the faces of all the other miners became visible. There was no expression, no humanity, only the reflection of automatons, machines made of rotting flesh, bound to an invisible order. My instinct was to reach for the handle of my revolver, but the weapon seemed ridiculous in comparison. Iron doesn't kill echoes. Lead doesn't silence those who already belong to the darkness. Even so, I kept my hand firmly on the holster, because the sheriff I once was won't allow me to bow to fear. It was then that I noticed something strange. The walls around them weren't just marked by pickaxes. There were symbols, scratched marks that didn't resemble anything made by human hands. Curves, pines that intertwined like roots, as if forming ancient writing. The miners weren't just digging randomly. They were following a pattern, digging toward something specific. One of them finally stopped. He lifted his face, and for an instant, our eyes met. There was no soul inside, just a void reflecting a faint red color, so similar to the one shining by in my own eyes. Then he opened his mouth, not to speak, but to release a hoarse, deep sound, like the echo of a tunnel collapsing. That sound ran through my veins like ice. The other miners also stopped in unison, as if a silent order had been given, and all together, slowly, they turned to me. In that moment, I understood that I was not just a witness. I was the intruder, and the mine did not forgive intruders, living or dead. When all those dead miners turned to me, the tunnel fell silent for a moment, but soon the sound returned, not the sound of pickaxes, but the echo, 3 knocks, repeated by the walls, as if the earth itself were giving orders. It was then that I realized they weren't digging on their own. They were obeying. Each blow was a call, each echo a command. I approached one of the walls, and the cold I felt against it made me recoil. It wasn't just stone. It was as if something was breathing behind it, waiting to be released. The marks the dead left followed a pattern, lines that intersected like forgotten symbols, too ancient to be the work of ordinary men. I understood, with a heavy heart, that they weren't digging for gold or coal. They were digging for something deeper, something that should never see the light of the desert. And every blow of those pickaxes was a step closer to freeing it. The echo of the pickaxes suddenly stopped, as if someone had given the order to stop. The silence that filled the mine was unnatural. It was dense, heavy, almost palpable. I felt cold sweat run down my face, and my hand tightened on the handle of my revolver, even though I knew there was no bullet capable of stopping what lay before me. The miners watched me. Their empty eyes glowed with a faint red light, a reflection, pay of the same curse that burns within me. Each of them held their pickaxes tightly, but they didn't move. They just waited. Then, from the depths of the tunnel, came the sound, not of tools, but of voices. Voices that overlapped like a chorus of agony, calling my name. Sheriff, Sheriff, my bones froze. It wasn't just a call. It was an invitation. The echo seemed to coil around me like invisible chains, pulling me toward the darkness. The symbols scratched into the walls began to glow faintly, traces that resembled roots or veins pulsing beneath the stones. It was as if the earth itself was alive, hungry. The miners, one by one, raised their picks, but instead of returning to the wall, they turned to me. The rhythm that had once been used for digging now surrounded me, slow taps against the ground, as if marking the time of my sentence. In that moment, I understood. They didn't just want to free what was trapped in the rock. They wanted to deliver me to it. The air inside the mine became so heavy it felt like liquid, as if I were breathing in an underground river. The miners surrounded me, their red eyes reflecting the same cursed glow I feel in my soul. For a moment, I thought I would be swallowed by them, dragged down into the depths like another worker condemned to dig for eternity. But then the echo sounded again. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. They didn't come from the pickaxes, nor from the dead. They came from the earth itself. The ground shook beneath my feet, and the walls began to creak, as if something were trying to break through the stone enclosure. The symbols glowing on the walls pulsed brighter, radiating a faint red light that looked like blood mixed with fire. I felt a force trying to pull me into that pattern, as if each line were a door, and the dead, obedient as ever, went back to digging, ignoring my presence. It was as if I had ceased to be important to them, as if their mission were greater than that of a mere cursed sheriff. I ran back through the tunnel, my boots sinking into the dust and broken tracks. Behind me, the sounds returned, pickaxes clanging, voices murmuring. and the eternal rhythm of those digging not for life, but for damnation. When I reached the mine entrance, the desert wind hit me like a punch. The air outside, though cold and dry, felt lighter than any breath I'd taken within those walls. I stopped, panting, and looked back. The darkness of the mine seemed to be watching me. There was no visible movement, but the sound continued. The echo of tools, the muffled voices, the incessant calling. I closed my eyes and understood. The dead did not rest. They continued to work night after night, digging deeper, and deeper, not for gold, not for cold, but for something buried theirs, something that sooner or later would find its way out. I touched the star on my chest. The metal was cold as ice, and I wondered if I would be the next to dig alongside them when my time came. Red Hollow does not forgive. Red Hollow does not forget. And now I ask you, if you were in front of this mine, would you have the courage to enter and hear the echoes of the dead? Or would you flee before the earth called your name? And so ends another night in Red Hollow. But I know the mine won't remain silent forever. The echo of the pickaxes will continue, ever deeper, until it reveals what should never see the light. In the next video, you'll discover how far this curse can take us, if you have the courage to return. But tell me, if it were you, would you have entered that mine to face the dead, or would you have fled before the echo called your name? I want to read your answer in the comments.